Welcome to the Eat This Book podcast. I'm Michael Whitworth. Each day we take a small piece of scripture and we sit with it. Not a quick snack that disappears before lunch, not a chore you check off of a list, but rather a meal meant to be savored. So pull up a chair. Let's eat. When someone writes a will, they're making promises about the future. This house goes to my daughter. This account goes to my son. These words to the people I love. But while the person is still alive, the will does nothing. The daughter can read the document, hold it in her hands, know exactly what's been promised her, and still receive nothing. The house stays with its owner. The account stays untouched. A will is a promise waiting on a death. Only when the one who wrote it dies does the inheritance actually pass into the hands of those it was written for. The writer of Hebrews takes that one ordinary legal reality, something his audience knew from daily life, and uses it to explain the deepest mystery of the cross. Why did Jesus have to die? Part of the answer, he says, is this: an inheritance was waiting, and inheritance requires a death. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. The word therefore reaches back to everything we just heard about the blood of Christ purifying the conscience. Because of that cleansing, Jesus is now the mediator of a new covenant. A mediator is a go-between, someone who stands in the middle and brings two parties together. Under the old covenant, Moses stood in the middle. Now Jesus stands there, but he does something Moses never could. He doesn't just deliver the terms of the covenant, he secures its benefits with his own death. And notice the goal, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. There it is, an inheritance. Not wages earned, not a prize won, but an inheritance received. You don't earn an inheritance by working for it. You receive it because someone included you and someone died. The whole framing shifts here from law to legacy, from what you owe to what you've been given. The writer also names what the death accomplishes backward as well as forward. It redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. This is a striking claim. The sins committed under the old covenant, all those centuries of failure that the animal sacrifices could only cover temporarily, were never truly dealt with by the blood. They were held, in a sense, on account, waiting, and the death of Christ reaches back across all that history and settles the debt that the old system could only defer. Think about what that means. Every faithful Israelite who ever offered a sacrifice, trusting God's mercy without knowing exactly how it would come, was relying on a payment that hadn't been made yet. The cross reaches backward and covers them too. The death of Christ is not only forward-looking, it redeems the failures that piled up under the covenant that could never finally remove them. And then the writer makes a move that turns on a single word, a word that in the original language means both covenant and will, the kind of will that distributes an inheritance. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Here the writer leans into the everyday logic of inheritance law. A will means nothing while its author lives. You can write it, sign it, seal it, and file it away. But it distributes nothing until a death occurs. That's simply how a will works. It is, by its very nature, a promise that activates only through death. And the writer's point is quietly stunning. If the new covenant is like a will, an arrangement that hands an eternal inheritance to those it names, then it too required a death to take effect. The promises could be written, the names could be listed, but nothing would pass into anyone's hands until the one who made it died. The cross was not a tragic interruption of the plan, the cross was the plan. The death was the mechanism by which the inheritance was released. This reframes the crucifixion in a way that would have comforted the writer's struggling audience. They may have looked at the death of Jesus and wondered how something so brutal could be good news. The writer answers, the death was necessary, not as a defeat, but as the activation of a will. The one who wrote the covenant, who promised the inheritance, who named the heirs, had to die for the heirs to receive what he promised them. His death was the moment the inheritance became yours. And unlike an ordinary will, there's a difference that changes everything. When a normal person dies to activate their will, they're gone. The inheritance passes to the heirs, but the one who loved them is no longer there. With Jesus, the will took effect through his death, and then he rose. The one who died to give you the inheritance is still alive to share it with you. He is both the one whose death released the promise and the living presence who now walks with the heirs. The will was activated, and the author is still in the room. Here's what we should savor from this passage. First, it's an inheritance, not a wage. The whole logic of this passage is the logic of legacy, not labor. An inheritance comes to you because you were named and because someone died, not because you earned it. If you've been treating your standing with God as a paycheck you have to keep earning, this passage moves you into a different world entirely. You are not an employee negotiating wages. You are an heir receiving what was left to you. Second, the death was the mechanism, not the tragedy. The cross can look like the moment everything went wrong. This passage says it was the moment everything was released. A will requires a death. The inheritance the son promised could not pass to the heirs until the one who promised it died. His death was not the failure of the plan, it was the plan working exactly as it had to. And third, the debt reached backward too. The cross settled accounts that had been waiting for centuries. Every failure the old covenant could only cover temporarily was finally redeemed by a death that reached back across all of history. Nothing was left hanging. The payment that everyone before Christ was trusting God to somehow make, he made. If you've been living as though your relationship with God is a wage you have to keep earning, clocking in each day, afraid that if you stop performing you'll lose your standing, this passage offers you a completely different identity. You are not an employee. You are an heir. An inheritance was left to you, and it came through a death, not through your labor. Stop working to earn what was already been willed to you. If the cross has ever seemed to you like a senseless tragedy, a good man destroyed by cruel people, this passage gives you a deeper lens. The death was necessary, not because Jesus was overpowered, but because a will requires the death of the one who made it. He didn't lose his life, he spent it, deliberately, to activate the inheritance he wanted you to have. What looks like defeat was the release of a promise. If you carry guilt over the past, failures that feel too old and too many to ever be resolved, notice that the cross reached backward. It redeemed transgressions committed long before, sins the old system could only defer. If Christ's death could settle centuries of accumulated failure, it can certainly settle yours. Nothing in your past is too far back for a death that reaches across all of history. If you feel like you've been waiting on a promise that never seems to arrive, an inheritance you've been told is yours but haven't yet received, remember that the will has already taken effect. The death has occurred. The inheritance is not pending the way a living person's will is pending. The author has died and risen, and the promise is active now. What was written for you is already in force. And if you've believed that the one who saved you is distant, that he did his work and stepped away, this passage holds together two things an ordinary will never could. The author died to activate the inheritance, and the author is alive to share it. Jesus is not a benefactor you'll never meet. He is the living one who both secured your inheritance and stays to walk you into it. The will took effect, and the one who wrote it is still here. Next time on Eat This Book, why is blood at the center of the Bible story of forgiveness? Hebrews 9 gives an answer that reaches from Mount Sinai to the cross. Join me as we discover why every sacrifice was pointing to one final payment, and why forgiveness was never free, even though it is freely given. Thanks for eating with me. Until next time, may the Word dwell in you richly.